In my last video I made this pretty cool seat for a retro 70s style chair. In this video I'll finish it. There's still a fair amount to do. There's the upholstered seat pad and backrest, the pedestal base and a simple but effective swivel mechanism. I'll start with the base, which I'll make from this old coffee table top that someone dropped off here years ago. It's super heavy and I'm pretty certain it's spotted gum. I'll break it down into a couple of boards, then prepare it to make a segmented ring for the very bottom of the base. I need one flat edge to run against the table saw fence, and rather than get the jointer out and set up, I'll do it with a hand plane. Now I've cut the opposite edge, I'll flip it around and trim it to its final dimension. I need 8 pieces to make up the segmented ring, so I'm cutting a 22.5 degree angle on one end of each board. Well, that wasn't a good start to the project. It was a bit of a sad moment. I really do love this camera. Anyway, it does still work, as you can see here, but it's difficult to set up as the screen really isn't very clear. I bought an external monitor and that's allowed me to continue the project with the camera, but I will have to get it fixed. I need 3 smaller layers, which I'll make from this rough sawn timber. I'm not sure what it is as it's all mixed hardwood, but it is very dense. I didn't mention while working on the first layer that I'd chosen these hardwoods to add weight to the base. I was originally going to make the base from steel, but I couldn't think of a good way of doing it. That's all of the pieces cut, but I've decided to reinforce the main layer by adding splines to the joints. I'll cut the splines first and then cut the grooves into the pieces to get a good fit. I'm making one cut, then nudging the fence over and making a second cut. I want the spline to be a good fit, but not too tight, although it doesn't want to be too sloppy either. When it comes to gluing them in, the spline can swell with the wet glue and it can make it an unhappy glue up, and I know this because I've done it more than once. To pull them together I used reinforced tape, and I took the plastic off the workbench as it was tearing up and getting in the way, so I'll just clean the top down afterwards. They all worked out well. Next I'll make a vertical column that will fit through these pieces and give the base some height. I'll glue up segments again, and the only way I could get the pieces out of this timber was to make it with 16 pieces. They're a bit wider than they need to be and it will be easier to trim them down now. I'm putting a couple of pieces of tape around just to hold them together, and then I'll go around again and pull that tape tight. I really do like this reinforced tape method. While the glue's setting on that, I'll fill in the centre of the two largest rings with some scrap plywood. That's all of the pieces glued up and ready to shape. Maybe it's fairly obvious, but they're going to go something like this, just the layers built up, and then the column will go through the whole thing, and that should give it plenty of strength. The column will need a tenon turning on there, so the next thing I need to do is drill holes in all these pieces. I don't have a forcener bit big enough so I can go all the way through after it's been glued, so I'm going to drill them all first with this hole saw and then glue them together afterwards. The bottom layer is too big to fit on the drill press, so I'll do that with a cordless drill. I'll quickly pass the rings through the thickness sander so I have flat surfaces to glue together. Before I glue them, I'll line up the bores and mark the positions first. I left it for a couple of hours. I was keen to see how well the bore lined up, and it wasn't too bad at all. Next I'll mount the column on the lathe and begin by turning it round. This isn't the nicest wood to turn, in fact it's pretty horrible. As I said, it is dense and it's been well seasoned as it's been in storage for years. Next I'll turn the tenon, so I'll measure the length directly from the base and add a little bit more. I'm leaving it slightly oversized and then I'll fine tune it later on. I made a template for the finished shape of the pedestal, so this will get me close to what I need for the two parts of the base to come together. That's close enough. I left a little extra on where the column will transition into the base, so I'll have enough material to play with. I just need to finish sizing the tenon to fit. I want a good fit, not too tight, but not too sloppy either, and that will be about perfect when I've cleaned up a few bits of stray glue from inside the bore. Next I need to drill out down the column for a seat post to fit into. Because I don't have a steady rest for my wood lathe, I'll bore it out using the metal lathe. To stop the brass supports from burning the wood too much, I'll apply some paste wax first. I reckon that should work, so let's bore it out. I made this extension a couple of years ago and it's already been used a fair amount of times. I did make a build video for that, which if you're interested you can find on my Patreon. This will be the seat post and the end will sit on a ball bearing which should produce a very nice swivel action. I just need to drill out a recess into the bottom of the bore. That should work well. Next I'll final fit the two pieces together. Before I glue them though, I'll mount the base section to the lathe and I'll turn it to rough shape first. I've been a bit worried about this step as my lathe isn't that substantial and this is quite a heavy piece. I also need to turn it on the front of the lathe as I don't have enough swing over the bed. I don't have a rest either to reach out far enough to turn it, so I'm going to try shaping it with an angle grinder while the lathe's turning. I'm really not sure how this will go and I wouldn't say that I'm super confident. I'll spin it up first at the lowest speed and I'll stand back and just see how it runs. It actually looks okay and it's not shaking around, so let's give it a go. It is bouncing a touch as it's contacting the points of the segmented ring, but I've got a good grip and stance and I'm taking it easy. I'm by no means recommending this method though. I think with some caution it isn't too dangerous, but definitely not the safest thing I've ever done. As it starts to become more round, the grinder is a lot happier and running smoother. It's not 100% concentric as the grinder being held freehand and no work rest is just following the blank. If the blank is slightly off, which it would be, then the finished base will be slightly out of concentricity as well. It really doesn't matter though for a base like this as long as it isn't noticeable. I did remount the faceplate a couple of times to get the bore as true as I could. I keep stopping and checking progress and I think it's working out well. Next I'll glue the column in, then I'll remount it on the lathe and finish the whole thing. I could have glued it together from the start and turned it in one go, but I thought it'd be safer to get both pieces closer first. Now they'll run a little smoother with minimal shaping left to do. I left it while I had lunch and then got back into it. I just need to blend in the transition and then sand it. I'd like to point out that I'm no expert at any of this stuff. I just have an idea, figure out how I'm going to do it and then just give it a go and do my best. Hopefully this inspires you to get into your own workshop and have a go at making something yourself. That's it, it's done and went much better than I thought it would. I just need to carve out the underneath for a foot so it sits better on the floor. This doesn't need to be perfect, so I'll just do it by hand. I've made a crazy amount of dust on this project, so I'll deal with that next. It took me about 20 minutes or so using a leaf blower from the back of the workshop to the front. I did this about 5 times and then I closed up the workshop to let the dust settle overnight. I do this a couple of times a year and it was due to be done anyway, and it also helps when you're doing this to have a good respirator. The workshop looks good to go again, so next I'll stain the base, and I reckon black will be a good contrast with the seat. The standoffs that I use are just scraps of plywood with a wood screw through them. I made these years ago and they get used all the time. I put a few coats of stain on to get some depth and really darken it up. The stain's dry, so I'll brush on a coat of polyurethane varnish. This has been the worst part of the project for me. I rarely use oil-based varnish. I thought it'd work well here, especially on top of the oil-based stain, but it's taken so long to dry between coats, making it difficult to get the job finished. It is a super durable finish, but I won't be using it again anytime soon. Over the next few days I'll put more coats on and build up the finish. Here's a bit of a glimpse on how it should look. Next I need to make it swivel and connect the two together, and to do that I'll use these pieces here. I'll start with this piece of plastic, which I need to take a touch off the outside diameter to fit into the bore, then drill through it for this seat post to pass through. I don't have a 22.5mm drill bit to match the diameter of the bar, so I'm drilling it at 22. I will bore it out, but before I do that I'll flip it around and drill the opposite end first. That should work well along with the ball bearing. The seat post will be welded to the plate. It will also have another piece to support it, but next I'll make a collar to keep the bushing in the right position. I did a pretty nice job of that, but I forgot completely about turning the outside diameter down to size, so I'd better do that next. I have this expanding mandrel from a previous project which I turned down to accept the collar. I've decided to put a washer in first for the ball bearing to sit on, as I don't want it to press into the wood and potentially split it. I don't think it would, but it's better to be safe. I think that's going to work great. Next I need to make a collar to fit over the top. This will contain the edge of the column, stopping any chance of the wood splitting apart, and also cover the bushing, which will prevent the seat from coming away from the base. I'll use this 20 by 5mm flat bar to make a ring and then weld the cap on top of that. I just made a bending jig off camera sticking out the front of the fly press, which I think should work well. It'll give enough room for the ring to wrap all the way around. When using the fly press to do any bending, I always use the stop on the top. This keeps things consistent. I make a pass, then I adjust the stop and make another pass. I could have worked out the correct length, but it only takes a few seconds to zip off a piece, and at the same time it gets rid of the end bits that don't bend perfectly round. I did this a few times with some checking on the chair base until it was perfect. One last time should do it. I cleaned up the weld off camera, and even though it was just about perfect, I ran it through the bending jig once more. I reckon that did an awesome job, and I always enjoy using the fly press. That's ready to fit. Using a brad point bit the same size as the holes in the cap, I can find the centre and mark where I need to drill. I planned on using threaded inserts, but I'll do a quick test first near the edge of a scrap piece, as I'm worried it may break out. It's not terrible, but I won't risk it, so instead I've decided to use these rib nuts, which are made for sheet steel. I'll epoxy them in, but first I'll countersink the hole so the rib nut will sit more flush. While that's setting, I'll start on the backrest and seat pad, and I'll start by making a template for the backrest. Now I've got the outline, I'll reduce and offset that just by eye. That looks pretty good. The backrest will have a plywood backing ready for the upholstery, but it needs to bend, so I'll do that with a series of curve cuts. When I come to upholster it, I need the plywood to stay in the correct shape. If I covered it while it's flat, it would then crinkle up when I bent it into shape afterwards. To do that, I'll glue veneers to the inside and clamp it directly to the seat, and when it dries, it should keep its shape. The varnish isn't finished on the seat, it still needs sanding yet, so that's why I'm not worrying too much about covering it. It wasn't the prettiest glue up and I had to wrestle with it, but I managed to make it work. None of this will be seen, it's just to conform the shape. So let's have a look and see if it kept its shape. It hardly sprang back at all. I reckon that worked pretty well. The glue also cleaned off the seat easily enough. After sanding it back, I decided to fill in the few pieces where the veneer didn't quite reach. I don't think it was necessary, but it was easy enough to do. Now I'll make the template for the seat pad. I'll smooth over all the edges on the seat pad and the backrest ready to upholster them. Before I do cover them, I'll fix bolts in the seat pad that will go through the seat and get fixed from the underneath. I'm wondering if you'd feel the bolts through the foam on the finished seat when you sit on it, so I'll grind them down a touch. I still feel they're sticking out a bit, so I've decided to add this second piece of plywood. I didn't show it, but I marked the hole positions on the seat before I put the bolts into the plywood. I'll drill those out now, and then I'll put another coat of finish on the seat and on the base. That coat really didn't go well. This new can of varnish, which is the same brand as the one I used on the previous coat, was horrible. It left a real orange peel finish to it. When it's dry, I'll have to sand it back and do it again. Anyway, back to the seat pad. I'll sand it smooth, then start to upholster it. I'll do the seat first, as that will be easier than the backrest, and it'll give me some practice. I'm not sure how well this will go. I'm definitely no upholsterer. I've got some old reclaimed foam that's been sitting around for years, which I think will work well. Next I'll wrap them in Dacron, which hides any imperfections and will give the pads a softer and rounder look. For the actual cover material, I'll use leather, which I bought from a local upholsterer's. I took the seat so I could have a look at some samples next to it, and they were super helpful and gave me some advice. So let's give it a go, and hopefully I don't stuff it up. I'm trying to keep even pressure all the way around. I'm starting from the middle of each edge and working towards the corners. Some of the staples will be temporary and they'll get removed and replaced as needed when I need to pull certain areas tighter. I'm pulling the leather and making sure to get the pleats on the underside and not along the edge. That felt like it went pretty well. It definitely could have been much worse. I was going to use this liner, but I don't see the point as it's just something else to stop the pad from sitting as flat to the seat as possible. I reckon that looks awesome, just like I hoped it would. Next I'll do the backrest, which I'm not quite so confident about. I'll start from the middle and then work towards the ends. It wants to crease up, but it seems to sit better if I relieve the edge with a series of cuts, so I'll keep doing this and see how it goes. That seems to be doing the trick. I really did have my doubts when I started this piece, as it really was creasing up, but it's starting to look good. I doubled up the staples and staggered them, as some of the staples were hitting the kerf cuts in the plywood. It seemed secure enough though, and I'm super happy with how it came out. It really is starting to come together. I just need to make one more part, which is the base plate to fix the seat to. Next I'll weld on the seat post, and off camera I prepared this piece on the lathe to add some support. I just need to mark out the seat post length, which I'll do in place using a piece of plywood, which will be the clearance between the seat and the base. I cut that off camera, so next I'll weld the post to the support first and then weld that to the plate. While the paint's drying, I'll recut the seat and the base. I've thinned out the varnish 50-50 with spirit, so I'll apply that by wiping it on with a rag. The next day I wet sanded them and recoated them again. I left it for another full day to dry, so now I can fix the backrest. I don't want any screws or bolts visible from the back, so I'll glue it in place. This stuff sticks to anything, so it's never going to come apart. I'm not quite sure how much to put on, but I really don't want any to squeeze out, so I think this will be just the right amount. I'm not using clamps as the finish on the wood is still a bit soft, so instead I'll use weights. I'm being sure to keep it centered with a mark that I made on this tape. That's everything ready to finally assemble it. I drilled a couple of divots where the collar bolts on, so there's no way that it can shift afterwards. It's left some indents in the backrest. I should have spread the weight with something like thick cardboard, but hopefully they'll come out. The indents haven't completely gone, but they seem to be slowly disappearing. That's it, it's complete, so let's try it out. The swivel mechanism works fantastic. I absolutely love it. I'm so happy with how it's come out. I'm not even sure where it's going to live, but I'm sure I'll find somewhere. One thing I would change is the seat pad isn't the most comfortable. It could do with going back a touch, maybe make the whole thing bigger so it comes up around those curves. I did sit in the seat early on before I made the seat pad, and the shape of the seat really is very comfortable. It's not terrible and I can live with it, but it would be better if it was bigger. Also, the varnish needs buffing out, but I'll do that in a week or so when it's fully hardened. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.